Welcome to the second day of the MLK50, Glenville50, commemorating the Glenville Uprising and its legacy 50 years later through the lens of 4 generations. I'm Dr. Marilyn Sanders Mobley, Vice President for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity here at Case Western Reserve University, where I am also a member of the Social Justice Leadership Institute leadership team. With the permission of the elders to speak, I need elders to nod at me. I have their permission, thank you. With the permission of the elders to speak, I am pleased to have the honor of welcoming you to the campus of Case Western Reserve University for this very important, timely conference. I am so pleased about the wonderful turnout we had yesterday, and I'm very pleased about all of you who have joined us here today. I want to acknowledge and thank the co-directors of the Social Justice Institute, Dr. Tim Black, Associate Professor of Sociology, and Dr. John Flores, Associate Professor of History, for their leadership in continuing the vision of our founder, Dr. Rhonda Williams. I also would like to acknowledge and thank the Planning Committee for this event, which includes our sponsors, the Social Justice Institute, the MLK Celebration Committee, and IdeaStream, who is here again and will be recording next door memories of those who have reflections from the Glenville shootout or who want to share their reflections even about today. So we hope if you're interested in doing that, you will go out these doors and to the left, and you will find a room where if you'd like to share your reflections, they are available. Also with us is Paul Sapin, who is filming a documentary called A Few Nagging Questions about the Glenville shootout. The documentary follows Glenville High School students who are investigating the event. Paul and his team is here with us today, so you can raise your hand, Paul and his team, and they will be available. If you have objections to being part of the documentary, please make it known to one of the members of the leadership team. We also would like to acknowledge and thank Chanel Jones of the MLK Library, Wilfred Bradford of the Langston Hughes Library, Sharon Jefferson of the Glenville branch of the Public Library, and Lisa Collins of the Social Justice Institute. If you were part of the planning committee, could you please stand so that we can applaud your efforts? We also want to thank the woman who chaired this entire commemoration with vision, passion, and pure love, Janice Eatman-Williams. Janice, I don't know where you are, but I know you're there. Janice, we thank you and appreciate you not only for your hard work on this commemoration, and we understand that there was another brother who called you and got you started, but I think you would have done it anyway. It's just in you to do. But for the ways in which you help all of us remember and engage with the history and the people of this community every day, we thank you. As an alum of Case Western Reserve myself, I earned my PhD in English from Case Western in 1987. From the moment I returned to Cleveland in 2009 to accept the leadership role in diversity, you have been a bright light, Janice, a dear colleague and a wonderful fellow alum and sister friend. We love you and appreciate all the ways that you share your love for us and this community. Yesterday, we engaged in some critical reflections and conversations about Glenville, both before and since the riots of 1968. As our speakers shared their stories and Dr. Raymond Winbush moderated the panel discussions, I realized they were weaving a tapestry of a counter-narrative to speak back to the official narrative, a counter-narrative to speak back to the official narrative. And many of us in this room know that is what our institutions often have to do. We have representatives here from the Call-in Post. We know the Call-in Post had to speak back to an official narrative that was not recording our voices and our stories. So I appreciate the ways in which this counter-narrative that we're weaving these 2 days is incorporating voices that were left out, perspectives that were left out, and lived realities of people's lives and their families, neighbors, and friends. When I asked this brother about the clothes he was wearing, he said it's got family on it. So we need to record, we need to have records of, we need to tell the stories of the families, the neighbors, and the friends. Author Toni Morrison, and many of you know I'm a Toni Morrison scholar, author Toni Morrison says, narrative is radical, creating us at the moment it is being created. So we are blessed to have those who lived through the period before, during, and since the Glenville uprising. I'm from Akron, Ohio. I was born and raised in Akron, Ohio, but in '68, I heard about it. We heard yesterday from community activists, entrepreneurs, leaders, and grassroots foot soldiers who stayed behind the scenes but who know more than they ever shared or have been given a forum to share. With this conference, we have created a space to hear those stories. We need their voices, we need their stories, and we need their wisdom more than ever. It is important, however, that this conference is an intergenerational conference because we also need the voices and the perspectives of this current generation. As the sister told us yesterday, we need the voices of the millennials and those who understand the Black Lives Matter movement, how it emerged, and why it demands our attention. We need the voices of the elders and the voices of our young people and our students if we are going to wage an effective struggle against the forces of injustice that are currently at work in our community and across this nation. We know, as Dr. King said, that justice does not roll in on wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. The key word, two key words, continuous and struggle. This two-day conference is an opportunity to remember the struggle that has brought us to this moment in time, and to reflect on what our struggle must look like today and in the future. Using Dr. King's last book, which many of you have heard me say is one of my favorites. You know that book, many of us in this room know that book is Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? Such a prophetic book. If you haven't read the book, read the book. Have it in your library right next to Souls of Black Folk. We are hoping to hear some additional perspectives today to continue the conversation we began yesterday. Like many of you, I attended many of the programs this past year designated to celebrate the memory of Mayor Carl Stokes and his brother, the late Congressman Louis Stokes, who also was an alum and a faculty member here at Case Western. The legacy report from that year-long celebration focused, as Dr. Tim Black said yesterday, on education, on housing, on safety, health, and economic development. But we have also begun a conversation at this conference on the politics of change, on gentrification, on disinvestment, on redlining, on state violence and policing, among other topics. And as Janice Eatman-Williams said to me yesterday, this whole conference has already gone deeper than some people may have envisioned, and that's a good thing. 1968, as I refer to it, was a Sankofa moment. 1968 was a Sankofa moment for Glenville and for Black communities across this nation. On many college campuses, and I was in undergraduate school at Barnard College of Columbia University, and we just celebrated our anniversary similar to this, where the activists who were part of the takeover of Columbia University came together, and we had a similar kind of moment, but we didn't have as many members of the community. So we're learning from this event, I think, for those of us who are still talking about what role the Harlem community played in the Black student takeover of Columbia University. Many people only think of it only as a Mark Rudd and SDS, anti-Vietnam War movement, but it was more than that. And so I came together with other Black alumni at Barnard and Columbia University to have a similar kind of Sankofa moment. On many college campuses, the period of radical unrest led to educational interventions in the form of Black studies, Pan-African studies, Latino studies, ethnic studies, and other academic programs dedicated to studying the history and culture of Black and brown communities. I'm pleased to report that Case Western Reserve University just approved a new minor in African and African American studies this past semester, which will continue and expand the work of the Black Studies program it once had back in the 70s that emerged from the struggle of the late 60s. Do you hear how I'm making connections here? It's so important important that we make these connections, and this conference is for that reason. This conference, therefore, is a Sankofa moment as well. Like the two-headed Sankofa bird of the Adinkra symbols from the West African nation of Ghana, that has one head facing the past and one head facing the future, this conference has created a Sankofa moment that is an example of what I call both and thinking. Our struggle and this moment are not either-or moments. We need to reflect both on our past and where we go from here. We need to acknowledge the racism, white supremacy, oppression, and injustice that has been part of our nation's history, and we need to celebrate our rich heritage of resistance, our resilience in the face of oppression, and as Sister Norma reminded us yesterday, our beautiful history of contributing our gifts, of what W.B. Du Bois identified in Souls of Black Folk as 3 gifts: the gift of story and song, the gift of sweat, and the gift of spirit. All, as he says, to be co-workers in the kingdom of culture. No one can take that from us, and if others leave us out of the story, we must tell our own. My prayer is that we leave here with both perspectives in mind, that we are a great and mighty people, and that our struggle for social justice and change continues. As Brother Don Freeman and his wife, Sister Norma, reminded us in their new 50th anniversary issue of Vibration, inequality is the arch enemy of democracy. Inequality is the arch enemy of democracy. So we know we are in a fight for our very lives. So before I introduce today's moderator, I've been asked if I would do a prayer of invocation. So all who would join me, let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for the very breath of life and the privilege of this gathering. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, God who has brought us thus far on our way. We thank you for the soil on which we stand or sit, for we know that blood, sweat, and tears are in the soil, and that it is therefore holy ground. We thank you for those Native American sisters and brothers who were on this soil before we arrived, and we thank you for our ancestors, both those who did not survive the Middle Passage of the transatlantic slave trade and those who did, those who survived enslavement and those who struggled to create a better life for those who came after them, those who resisted. We celebrate them. We thank you for the sisters and brothers whose stories at this conference are giving us a better perspective on what happened, not only in Glenville, but around this country to Black people. And we thank you for this opportunity to reflect on what the struggle for justice should look like today, now, and for generations to come for all of us. We invoke your presence in this gathering, and we pray that we will be inspired to take up the struggle with new passion and commitment as never before. And may we all say together, Amen. It is now my pleasure to introduce Samara Arki, who will serve as today's moderator. Samara Arki identifies as an educator, an activist, and an organizer. She is an interdisciplinary scholar with expert knowledge and skills to develop, implement, facilitate, and evaluate curricula that promote institutional equity, communication, and access for traditionally marginalized students and families. Most recently, Samara serves the Glenville community through the School Quality Advocacy Initiative. Supported by the Cleveland Transformation Alliance, the goal of the organization is to conduct citizen-led advocacy to transform and improve outcomes relative to academic, social, emotional, and overall health and well-being of Cleveland students. What could be more wonderful than that? Gemara proudly serves as an adjunct professor in the Department of Pan-African Studies at Kent State and is the founder of the Ellipsis Institute for Women of Color in the Academy, a program of the Floristone Mather Center for Women here at Case Western Reserve University. We claim her. We claim her. Currently a doctoral student in the College of Education at Northeastern University, her dissertation explores the need for critical pedagogies in teacher education and programs in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. Her most recent publications, Ruminations from a Black Mommy Activist, focuses on the joy, trauma, and drama of raising two sons in today's rapidly changing global society. As a mother who raised 2 sons, they're fully grown now, thank God, I appreciate that you take motherhood serious as a sacred mission. Samara has received various nominations, awards, and recognition for her service, including being recognized in Who's Who in Black Cleveland, Kaleidoscope's 40 and Under Club, High Tech Academy's Kiwanis Club. Samara cites her highest honor is getting to be, is getting to be the mom of her 2 amazing young kings, Solomon Tafari and Malcolm Sadiq. Let us please welcome Samara Arki to the podium. Joining her for session 4, Where Are We Now and Where Do We Go From Here, are Devin Branch, and as I call your name, if you could please come up. Devin Branch, Latina Brooks, Kim Foreman, Shanita Horton, Eric Johnson, and I think that's it. I believe I have everything. Thank you all for being here today. And I think the way we'll begin is if each of you could say a sentence. How about that? I don't know if you're going to be able to do this. If you could say a sentence about yourself, and then we'll go back and we'll begin answering the question that is on this session. Where do we go from here? So we'll start on the end with you. Okay, you can say 2 sentences.
2 sentences. Proud product of the Glenville community.
Thank you.
Glad to be here today.
I'm honored to be here today.
My name is Devin Branch, and I am a participant in the New African Independence Movement, and I identify myself not as an American, but as a member of a colonized, effectively, African nation in America.
Oh my, thank you. Language matters, so I appreciate he took the care to tell us that.
My name is Latina Brooks, and I'm actually an alum of Case Western Reserve and currently on assistant professor and director of the Master of Science program in the School of Nursing here.
Thank you.
Y'all already heard all my business in the streets. But I am here serving in the legacy of my father, Brigadier General J.R. Key, who was the lead of the Nationalist Party after the tragedy on July the 23rd.
Thank you. So we now need to hear from you as panelists with your perspective in mind. How would you answer this question? Where do you go? Where do we go from here? And I always say to my students, we need to problematize pronouns. You might even want to think about who is the we in that question. You might want to think about where is the here in that question. So I'm going to let you come at the question the way that you see fit. So we don't have to go up and down the row, however the Spirit is leading you. If you feel like you want to jump in and get your perspective first. Yes.
I'm Shanita Horton, and I'm an 18-year veteran teacher of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. So I will answer this question from the perspective of education.
Excellent.
There needs to be a demand on the Cleveland Metropolitan School District for our education. I've worked in Glenville. This is my 5th year in Glenville, but I graduated from Glenville class of '95. I am a tar blooder and very proud of it. But I feel that our district has for a long time neglected the east side of the city students and their education. And I feel that as a community, we're not speaking up and demanding the same things that the west side schools have been given, such as new school facilities, for example. Glenville and Collinwood are constantly on the list for patch jobs, while there's a brand new John Marshall, and 2 years ago, Max Hayes got a new building. But why aren't we speaking up? So we need to definitely speak up for our kids, for our children, to make sure that they have the same opportunities as the students who attend the West Side schools. It's all Cleveland Metropolitan School District, right? So why is there such a huge disparity between the East and the West Side?
So, as a fellow educator, I really want us to get into that question a little bit more, but because other people on the panel will come back to it. But I'm just going to invite you to help this audience, all of us, think together, what does that speaking up look like? In other words, how do we operationalize it? Because often at these gatherings, we say what we need to do, and then we applaud, everybody goes home and goes back to their business as usual. So it's a good opportunity for us to take you seriously. What might that look like if we went beyond speaking up for the East Side? So, okay.
Hi, I'm also a case alum, by the way. So what I want to talk about is I'm the director of Environmental Health Watch, and my focus today is on housing. But before I get into that, I really want people to understand that if prevention is our model, and children are living in spaces and places where they are strapped with brain poisoning, such as lead, or in a hospital because of asthma, and they're missing school, and the parents are missing work, they cannot show up to school prepared. And so what I try to understand and have people to connect the dots even around the safety issue, lead is linked to violent behavior, is linked to ADHD, is linked to all of these issues. And if we're not upstream with our approaches and looking at systematic changes and stay in a programmatic space, we're not going to see the needle move. So for example, across the nation, lead poisoning rates are at 1%. In Glenville, it's 20%. In East Cleveland, it's 20%. So we are still dealing with lead poisoning. It's an issue of the structure in the house. We're not testing all the children, but those who are confirmed, 1 in 5 are poisoned. That means that they could suffer from all of the effects of lead poisoning, right? And so when we talk about our reading scores, our test scores, and how children are thriving in school, they're getting sick from their from where they live. Also, immigrants who are coming into our country could check out well and have a well visit and be okay. They're coming into our places, in our homes, and getting lead poisoning and ending up in a hospital. So the issue that I want to raise is the understanding that where people live is causing ill and harm to them. And if we don't start to think about how we look at intersection of all of these issues and deal with root causes. So we are working on policy right now. I am leading a multi-sector collaborative in the neighborhood, and Glenville is one focus, Clark Fulton is another, but the approach we're taking is system-wide. We've already started a proactive inspection program. We've already enforced the rental registry for rental units. And so now the income that's generated from the enforcement, we're advocating that some of those dollars be allocated for low-income landlords, low-income renters, low-income homeowners, because the systems that we're asking the vulnerable populations to navigate, we need to make those better. And I could give more details later, but we are in the midst of looking at lead poisoning prevention policy for the city by the end of this year, and we've already made some advances through the collaborations that we're leading.
Thank you. As a member of the Social Justice Institute, I know it's in your program, but one of the things we care about in the Social Justice Institute is root causes. We didn't come together as an institute just to talk about things. We're exploring and trying to teach students how to examine root causes, so that I appreciate that language. Who's next? Okay.
Yeah. Actually, the reason I wanted to go next is because it actually leads right into what I was actually going to talk about in terms of health and health issues in the community. And two of the biggest health issues in Glenville and a lot of our communities in the city have been going on for 50 plus years. And one is infant mortality, but the other is lead poisoning. And it's a huge issue. And the problem is that we've been looking at it from a health standpoint. It's not something that's going to be fixed just in the hospital and clinic. Can we screen for lead? Yes. Could we do a better job of it? Yes. Could it be more widespread? Yes. Can we treat it once we determine that a child has a certain level of lead poisoning? Yes, we can, even though a lot of the damage has already been done. The problem is that if we're sending them back into the same situations that caused the exposure to begin with, we just have this vicious cycle. And I think that's what's been happening over the last 50 years. We've been doing the same thing over and over again and not getting any results. And so this is an issue that will cross housing, safety, economics, all of that, we're all of those entities working together to try to finally get some headway on this. I remember being a child myself growing up from Collinwood and being tested for lead and trying to figure out, okay, well, what's going on? Why are your blood counts so low? That kind of thing. And it was a lead issue. And it predates me, and it's been going on for about 60 plus years, and it's really frustrating as a healthcare provider that this is something that we really could prevent and have some headway on that we just seem to be going in circles with. So I totally agree that it has to be a concerted effort among different entities in order to actually make a difference there. The other is infant mortality. Again, it's sort of the same kind of thing. This has been an issue for a very long time. The actual rates in Cuyahoga County rival most third world countries in terms of infant mortality, particularly in Glenville from the period time of, I think, 2012 to 2015, had the highest absolute number of infant deaths in the state. And so again, this has been an issue that has been going on for a very long time, and it crosses SES, it crosses, all kinds of access boundaries, all of that those things that we always say, okay, well, it's because, people don't have the education or the income or the access. But even if you control for all of that, it's still an issue. And again, it's one of those things that I think is just not going to be solved inside of a healthcare institution. It's going to be solved within communities and trying to get to the root cause of what's happening in particular communities that this issue continues to happen.
So I want to speak to that one. The university, Case Western Reserve University, some of you may know, received a grant called First Year Cleveland. And First Year Cleveland is naming one of the reasons that one is staying in place. And they're naming racism as one of the reasons. They're saying it's not about your class status, because they're discovering that even women who are allegedly middle class, who have access to good health care, have good health care plans, they're experiencing some of the same things. So I'm co-chairing with Dr. Margaret Larkin's Pettigrew, the committee that's looking at how racism and interrupting racist practices, and they're looking at things like who schedules you, who schedules you, how you're treated if you're a pregnant woman from the moment you walk in to say, I need a schedule, to birth and after. So I don't want to get into that, but I appreciate you raising infant mortality as an issue for us today, because there is a group of people in town, and we're studying it on campus and in the community as an issue that is about racism. And it's not just, oh my goodness, I don't know if they have a good health care plan. Not the issue.
My name is Eric Johnson, and I want to jump in with the process about economic development and employment. From that standpoint, it ties into the previous comments in that we're talking about people who are living in a community where the majority of the housing is nearing or better than 100 years old. That's a considerable issue when you're talking about someone trying to do renovations and repair on things that are just really, really haven't been able, there's not even the technology there to fix that anymore. It takes really skilled craftspeople to engage in that process. And there aren't a lot of people in our community that do that kind of work. But we need them, and we need to be teaching our young people how to do it. To that end as well, I'd also say there's the inequity regarding how we are being taxed by our government. The screen flashing on the back has some data regarding tax valuations for our properties. And what I did, I looked at a few properties and compared data for tax valuations. And you can see in 2008, for some of these properties, even though it was a time where there was a bubble, there's just an amazing amount of inequity in tax valuation for properties in our community. And one of the biggest problems is when the bubble burst, everybody else got fixed but us. You know, it's almost a cause for legal action because we had to overpay for somebody else's mistake. We had a number of people who lost homes, properties, and no one's holding them accountable. Now the banks got out, and as a matter of fact, now if you try to get a loan, there's all kinds of restrictions and regulations that have been increased to stop you from fixing your property, let alone buying your property. So the question is what are we going to do and how are we going to engage in the community looking at some of the issues we had regarding historically the cost of our properties, the cost we had regarding income, incongruent incomes, people doing the same work and not getting the same pay. I mean, these are things that historically document our community. The numbers are there and we really have to take a look at it. But yesterday in our conversation, we came up with a statement kind of defining economic development in our community and what we thought it should look like. And the first was the means to obtain necessities for life, sufficient ability to gain purchasing power without impeding safety or the well-being of others, to gain resources and wealth, whether transactional or generational. Next was the efficient use of our foreign currencies to improve our ability to use resources as individuals or collective. Those currencies are voting, money, time, and talent. Third, the ability to produce tangible value that can be quantified internally and externally. So we've got to produce goods and resources and products in our community that have value, not only within our community, but outside of our community as well. The fourth, we need to organize, our economic development can be organized as a target group or neighborhood, but we still have to establish an identity, and we still have to look at territory as a consideration when we're talking about economic development. And five, it must always improve the physical and tangible space where it's taking place. So those are some of the things we discussed, and I look forward to having a further conversation about that today.
Thank you. Thank you for that detail. Yes.
Thank you. I'm glad that you mentioned the concept of root causes, because I think when you mention the concept of racism, I don't address the issues that our people face as racist issues of racism, but issues of national oppression effectively. That there are people who have a relationship with America that is inherently non-consensual, and those are people who were incorporated under the rule of America without ever having voted for it, either with their feet or with the ballot. And that would include ourselves, the pre-Columbian inhabitants of this region, that some might call Native Americans or First Nations people, Puerto Ricans, people of American Samoa, Guam, people whose relationship with this empire, not nation, but an empire that encompasses and governs other nations without their consent, is something that I think needs to be discovered. Now, in dealing with the question of safety and also policing, which I was asked to address, I would first like to address it from the point of what peoples can do for themselves, the relations we have with one another, and then the relationships between us and the police. And I would start with a quote from Ida B. Wells. And Ida B. Wells stated once, a Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every black home, and it should be used for that protection which the law refuses to give. Now, oftentimes, the question of self-defense, especially armed self-defense, has been mischaracterized as some sort of hyper-masculine tendency. But in many cases, it's been the women who've been the primary protectors of our people and our families. In many cases, they have done so with force of arms, and I think that is critical. And I think it's also critical to mention that, especially as every day we hear about the rise in militia, the rise in Klan, the rise in what they call people of color attacks. But primarily these attacks have been targeting people who have come forcibly under the rule of America, African people, what they would call Hispanics, but I would say there's a very significant difference between a Mexican person in California whose territory was conquered by America and someone who might be upper middle class from Argentina studying at Case.
Right.
So just to label them all Hispanics as if their relationship is the same with America, I think is a mistake. So to not take up too much time, I'll jump to points and then we can discuss things more fully in the question and answer period. But I do think it's important to realize that this rise did not begin with President Donald Trump. that it's always been with us. We've always lived under fascism in America as African people, and as new African people, it began to accelerate under the presidency of Barack Obama. And that culminated perhaps in the election of Donald Trump, but it wasn't Trump that incited this. To blame it on one individual, these are Americans, and Trump is representative of Americans. Now, the other thing is that, so we address that issue, and also, but with respect to the safety in our community, our safety will not come by increased policing. I believe safety in your community is a consequence of mutual knowledge and respect for the members of the community with one another. That is the best guarantee of safety in your community. And that can be achieved by first engaging with the people who live in your neighborhood before there's a situation of crisis. So your first conversation with your neighbor should not be how they should turn their music down. But when your neighbor comes to your neighborhood, when he moves next door to you, you should introduce yourself to your neighbors. You should talk to the people in your community as you pass them in the street, so that they know you and you know them. And then as crises arise between you and your neighbors, you can discuss them in a manner that is neighborly, not to strangers in a way that is likely to increase antagonisms. The next thing is, I think that we should learn and we should teach ourselves and our children nonviolent communication and how to de-escalate conflict when conflict exists. In many cases, the opposite has been fostered in our community. That the aggression that we have pent up in ourselves as a consequence of the oppression that we feel, we often misdirect against people in our own community, when really it should be directed against the person who's causing the oppression to begin with. And also dealing with that, the question of what I would call horizontal violence, violence with people who are on the same socioeconomic and national oppression plane with you. As a person who is a supporter and a participant in the New African Independence Movement, we have a portion of what we call the New African Creed that addresses our conduct and proper conduct among our people and in our community, and then I'll be wrapping up. And point number 12 says, I will love my brothers and sisters as myself. Point number 13 says, I will steal nothing from a brother or sister, cheat no brother or sister, misuse no brother or sister, inform on no brother or sister, and spread no gossip. Now, these things applied will do a great deal to address the issues of safety in our community. But also, there's a question that's raised by that statement that addresses another problem in our community, which I'll briefly address, and that is the portion that says, inform on no brother or sister. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this concept of no snitching and stop snitching campaigns and the anti-social character of that. This does not refer to that. What that is saying is that as a colonized people, there will always be those amongst us who will not accept that colonization, who have always been, and who remain defiant against that authority, and who will resist it. And as you should never have informed on Harriet Tubman, you should not inform on those people. However, that does not cover those who engage in antisocial practices in our community. And those who do that and seek to exploit the natural hostility that many members of our community have to law enforcement should not be protected, should not fall under that cover. Now, thank you. And that doesn't mean that we don't realize that the relationship between ourselves and the police cannot be normal, and it should not be normalized. As long as those police who police our communities do not come from our community, do not reside in our communities, and do not serve the interests of our communities and are not under the control of our communities. So we should have no illusions about the nature of policing in our community. But that being said, it should not allow us to give safe haven to those who would exploit our communities and who would actually contribute in the excuse that the police have to engage in the brutalities that they do. In fact, when you engage in antisocial behavior among the people in your community, you are actually a collaborator in the oppression of your people. And you are not deserving of their protection. In fact, under other circumstances, you are deserving of the wrath of that community. And when the community is strong enough, then that wrath should be visited upon you. And when people in that community visit that wrath upon the abusers of the community that are within the community, that's where that point that says inform on no brother or sister comes into play. We should not teach our people to have so much respect for law that you become insane. and that you defend the law of your oppressor over the interest of your community. And I think that's something we never learned. And a good example of how our oppressor has learned it is that in the Deep South, where lynching was prominent, they controlled the courts, elected all the judges you couldn't vote on. It made every single law. But when you violated their social norms and mores, even though the law was their law, the court was their court, and they were sure of the outcome if they arrested you on any kind of charge, they still said, when you violate certain norms, we will not even put you through the process which we have dictated to you. We will deal with you on the spot, right? But we have more respect for the oppressor law than the oppressor has for his own law. So we did not make this law. This is an imposition on us. But oftentimes we'll say, well, brother, that's against the law. And you defend your enemy law over the interests of your collective people. And I think that's part of not recognizing that it is an enemy law. That's an imposition upon you. And that it has no legitimacy. It's just a reality that we have to contend with.
Thank you. Thank you much.
I believe that the change that we are seeking to transform our community starts with us. That's something that my father taught me. And he didn't sit me down and teach me the principles of Black nationalism. He didn't sit me down and teach me what to do and what to say, but he lived his life that way. That's how he taught me. My dad had he was a lot of things. He had a lot of different careers, and that was one part of his life, but that was the core and that was the center of who he was. And if we really want to change our communities, we've got to do the work in ourselves first. We have to model the way for our young people to be. Dr. Mobley talked about creating this counter narrative. We've got to tell the stories. Sister Freeman, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. She is one of the elders who has been on the line in this community for years. And she is the first elder that I have ever heard say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry because I failed your generation. I'm sorry because I didn't do what I needed to do. That's what, when she said that to me, that made me sit up in my chair and listen and put a little bit more fire under me to move forward. Because when someone acknowledges that wrong, that's what we want, right? We were at the community policing meeting a couple weeks ago, and so we told them that we wanted the acknowledgement of you've been terrorizing us the whole time we've been here. And they refused to give us that acknowledgement, so we refused to move any further in that process. But when we have elders who can come down and apologize and acknowledge the things that have happened, the good and the bad, the things that make us feel good and those things that pain us, when we have an opportunity to deal with our trauma, we can move forward. What happened in Glenville 50 years ago was community trauma. And if we want to get past that, we've got to heal from that individually, but also as a community.
Wonderful. So I need to give this audience an opportunity to ask questions. Do I have time to do that? Okay, I certainly hope so. We have heard some really powerful statements here. Really powerful statements. And I believe this panel is so full of information, they have more to say. But I want to give you a chance to ask them questions. So do we have any questions? If not, I'm going to let the panel speak some more. Yes.
So what I'm about to say and ask is actually involved in what I've heard from various panelists. And I used to live on, and this has come up with some folks that I've talked to recently. I used to live in Garden Valley. Traveling down Garden Valley, I remember my old apartment, which was 7302 apartment 156. It's not there anymore. And what really stuck out to me was that though they tore that apartment down, those apartments down, what they did not do was make that area for something different. So what they have effectively done is they're putting more low-income housing there. So we're continuing the tradition of red line because we're putting more low-income, we're keeping them there. Also what's there are those environmental poisons that we're talking about. So they remain there. So now we don't have elected officials that are saying, let's put them somewhere else. So now I want to get into the economic aspect of this. The economic aspect of that is this. For starters, those people that were living in those apartments, because our city and county land banks hold land in other places. We put small apartments in those areas so that now they're in better areas around better schooling, maybe healthier areas, and they're closer to jobs because they currently are in an economically small area where there's no employment. So me bringing this up is, are folks focusing in on that? And if so, you know what I mean? You know, let us know what some of your plans are and so forth, because these are things some of us have been talking about and we've been writing about and so writing discourse about, but it's unfortunately, I never hear it from the people that I need and want to hear it.
To that end, the conversation and the program that we discussed was generated by the research that was found dealing specifically with the neighborhood of Glenville. Not saying it can't spread beyond, and not saying it's not something that can be operational beyond us, but I am telling you that where the beginning came from was talking about what happened in Glenville. And what it does, it gives us a framework and a way to look at other situations in other communities that are experiencing much of the same thing. The question I would have is, you know, by looking and taking this example, because we can't solve all the problems at once. And one of the biggest things that we really need to do is to identify victories. In each one of the pillars we've discussed, we have to work on identifying victories, identifying problems that we can deal with effectively and efficiently within the realm of where we are right now. And I believe we would welcome and continue to work on that process. We haven't come up with the world beater yet, but it's not. I'm not saying that we couldn't, you know, formulate and do something that would be broader than where we are. But I do think there's a commitment from the community, especially the people at the table. There's people we spoke with yesterday who want to do something ongoing. Once again, we start looking at the inequality related to taxation and to property valuation in our community. That's critical, because that's money taken out of our community's pocket to pay for a government that still doesn't provide services for us. You know, that we gotta look at the longer term picture here. It's a longer field here than just, you know, just the fact that the house was overvalued. Okay, we paid that money. We want our services. We want our schools better. We want our police to treat us better. We want all the things we're entitled to as tax-paying citizens in this region, in this community, in this country. And because we pay these taxes, and to defer to Devin, he said, you know, we need to really pay attention to, you know, how people follow the law, because while we're so busy paying taxes and, you know, trying to do what's right, other people are getting undervalued. They have friends that work in different places and they're able to get breaks. And that's not allotted to our community oftentimes. So I'm just saying that we need to, you know, we need to take steps. It's not going to happen overnight, but we welcome your energy and welcome everyone's energy to help us to continue to work on this process, because it's big and we need all the energy we need.
Okay, we're going to hear two more responses to this one person, but just remember, this panel is helping us talk about where do we go from here. And I think he was trying to ask, where do we go from here? Okay.
So we need an intersectional approach. So I identify as an intersectional feminist scholar, and that's cool for my identities and all of that. But when it comes down to doing this work in our communities, we need an intersectional approach. We need each other. Look at how long we've been here and everything that we've done that's got us here. We need to do something different. I'm hitting the table on purpose. We need to do something different. We need an intersectional approach. So it's up to us, right? We got the mantle passed down to us yesterday. It's up to us. There's a collection of readings called This Bridge Called My Back. Black women have been the bridge for years. We have been the bridge for years to liberate our community.
Thank you, ma'am.
We have to come to the table. We need to put aside our associations, our groups, our identities. We got to put that aside. And we have to know that together is the only way that we will win. So it's time for us to get organized. Like, when is the next meeting? Who's coming? Who's in charge of education? Who's in charge of health and safety? We got 2.5 hours. What are our outcomes? What are our agenda? We can't come to the table telling these stories anymore. We know the stories. We live the stories. They're repeated to us. We're talking about generations. They flood your timeline. They are trying to disenfranchise us. They want us to become desensitized to what is happening. It's time for us to stand up now and do it, and not ask who's doing this to volunteer. We can't be voluntold anymore. We have to step up on our own and take back our communities. We're not going to hear it from those people. If we were going to hear it from them, we'd have heard it. We can't wait for anybody to tell us anything. The response that we need is right here, and it's up to us to take that step to make it happen.
Yes, I agree. And in a response, I think first thing is that the people who recognize these problems have to become the people who are responsible for solving those problems. So that means that you can't rely on the people who are currently in power. If they are misusing their power, and they are, you have to develop the capacity independently to seize that power and then exercise it in a better fashion than they are. We had the issue of environmental racism shoved down our throat in Glenville and East Cleveland with this dump that was put there by the Cuyahoga County Land Bank. And we mobilized all the people in that area. Those people rose up, contacted the EPA, the Congress, and everything else, and we had that dump removed, and then we removed the mayor who put that dump there and the council president who was on the council at the time. So I think there has to be an escalation of political activism that targets people for repercussions that abuse our people. But then also, I think the sister who's here for education mentioned the fact that, our schools are not in our control, and in Cleveland there is mayoral control of schools. You have no vote. And I believe that you cannot vote that non-vote out. You have to fight it away, and that there may be the need for escalated demonstrations among students, including school boycotts again, that force a crisis situation that says we may not have the authority by vote in this city alone to have you restore our schools, but that if you do not restore home rule through the vote and an elected school board, that there will not be education as normal, because our children are not being educated anyway. So you might as well struggle to restore control. So I think that it's imperative that there always be a practical thing that can be done, that anybody can start moving on in their own community.
But even with those two issues that you raised, where's the link? Where's the science lesson for the students in school? Right? So when we're talking about our environmental justice that's in the community, that should be reflected in their curriculum in school. So where's the person on the line who's connecting with the person at the school to make sure that they get what they need? We can't anticipate our young people to go out here and be on the line and do all these protests if we're not modeling it for them.
Right.
I'm on the line. I'm in the protests, right? We have to take the stand and model the way and make these connections for people, because if we don't do it, it's not going to be done.
So,
Okay, I don't know where I am on time. Is someone going to tell me? Where am I? We want to hear
I'm
you.
trying to.
Go ahead.
Okay, so listen up.
Okay, so listen.
I work in Garden Valley right now. My Sustainable Communities program, I work on housing and I work on sustainable communities. An approach and a model needs to be long-term, right? So therefore, I utilize the money I get for program to try to work on organizing. So the question I always have is, I've been in a lot of spaces in the core city and many different communities monthly with residents. So the issue is this exchange of information, because I don't feel long-term residents have an opportunity to come together, navigate the situation, not just complain about the problem, develop solutions, then utilize the networks that I have and other partners have to get at the decision makers. What the issue is that I think we have an approach that we go to the community development corporations. Some are good, some are bad, some are not even connected to community. So right now I have two things in two irons in a pot, right? I always got something cooking up. So one, I'm working on strategies with, I don't know if you know Fred Ward in Glenville. He does civic engagement. And then we have the national project I'm working on with 12 funders. They are bringing money, so I want to do this policy and advocacy course that has been done in Buckeye. It was not extended because the funder decided they weren't going to support it. If I have control over the dollars, then I can determine how this rolls out. So my plan is to do the policy and advocacy so people have information of how decisions are made, who the decision makers are, come together as a collaborative, and then work on issues together. One. Secondly, I'm waiting to hear back next week on a 3-year, multi-year strategy to create these centers in the neighborhoods. If we come up with a strategy on a long-term strategic plan with the voices of people in the community, the folks I pick for policy advocates have already been door knocking. They're not connected with an organization. They can make their decisions on their own. They don't have to ask, somebody over there if they can participate. They've already done the work. Fred is doing his thing. I want to bring these folks together, pay them for the class. I'm not asking them to volunteer because their time is valuable. And also, I try to encourage the other folks with pots of money to do the model in a different way. We cannot depend on funding to do the work, but it is a jump start. We could leverage it to maintain and start the process for a long term. And once the process gets started and people in the communities have voice, because even with this lead issue, nobody in the communities is actually being heard right now, in my mind. So that's the type of work, practical application, on-the-ground strategies that I'm trying to help and work with. And I work with partners. I'm a small organization. Collaboration is how we get anything done. We're not going to go out on our own and think we're going to solve all these issues, but comprehensively, things have been done all across the country, and I know a lot of these people across the country that have been able to organize and do work, and we have to stop being focused on issue and be reactive. If we preparing ourselves, we can respond, and we don't have to keep reacting to every fire.
Okay, so we'll take one more question. Well, maybe we'll take two. I don't know how long your question is. Go ahead.
What you were just saying about cross-border collaboration, yes, that would work, but it would require a horizontal hierarchy to keep it effectively balanced. But as far as what you were saying what you were speaking on about trauma-informed care and trauma recovery, I had an idea, and I've been at the round table with people about impact leadership and appointing people, training them up to be like community engagement officers to get involved with the schools, with communities, kind of like this conference, periodically organized like serious discussions in neighborhoods based on relevant current issues to keep people abreast of what's going on, to hear people's voice, and to have somebody who can communicate at the round table with policymakers and decision makers to be the people of us. Where we're organizing, there is money available for certain projects like that, like pro-social coaching in the schools with, social emotional learning. As long as it's up under a grant for like, what do they call it, public health, model. As long as it's under the right type of heading, they will give money for it, and with all the competition for it. That's why cross-border collaboration, is important for everybody to come together instead of everybody trying to fight for the money individually. Come together under one umbrella and get the money and just have a grant overseeing it, distribute the money equally where it needs to go.
Thank you. So behind, I think we have a question from...
Can I respond to that real quick?
Oh, yes.
There actually is a small group of parents and families in the Glenville community that are organizing around trauma-informed care. So I've been working in this community for a few years. So there's a group that's already doing that. So let's make sure to connect.
Yes.
I'm stressing something that can be done now relative to what the first speaker on education indicated. Specifically, the 2014 bond issue allocated approximately $50 million for repairs and improvements in district schools. $47 million of that $50 million has already been spent. Disproportionate on west side schools and only a pittance on east side schools, meaning only $3 million of that money is left. It's in regard to that $3 million that we must respond now in terms of specifically Glenville and other east side schools getting as much of that $3 million left. Not a lot of money, but it's $3 million out of which, in terms of our money, we should, as much as we can, stress to the Board of Education that that money should be spent on east side schools, and I'm especially stressing Glenville. Now, the opportunity to do so is Tuesday, August 24th, 2018, 6:30 p.m. at the next board meeting of the Cleveland Board of Education at 1111 Superior Avenue. So I'm stressed that this is something that can and must be done now, because obviously, otherwise that $3 million that's left will still be disproportionately spent on west side schools.
Okay, so we have time for you to respond, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up because we're getting over.
That is an awesome, 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 awesome point. And I'm in the system. You know, it's hard to put the fire out if you're stuck inside the house. When my son graduated, I lost my parent voice. But you as community members, they don't mind asking you to vote for the levies whether or not you have children in the schools. So definitely ask questions. You can ask questions. Why was $47 million spent on the west side? What are you going to do with the $3 million? Ask questions and demand answers. Even if you're afraid that because they will BS you, they'll come up with, and ask questions about whatever BS answer that they give you. You have the right to know what's happening with the money they're asking you to pay. And these aren't just, you know, Cleveland's children. These are everybody's children.
Right.
They leave the Glenville community, they leave Cleveland, and they go off, and then they go on and to become citizens of the world. And we need for them to be highly functioning, competent, capable citizens of the world. Ask questions, especially if you voted for those levies.
So we have to move on. One of our guests has arrived. So panelists, is there any parting word from any other person on the panel who hasn't spoken yet, who hasn't had another chance to speak? Can we think, oh, go ahead.
The only thing that I would say in terms of this, because health is very complicated. Healthcare is extremely complicated. But the one thing that I will say in terms of what we can do as a community and individuals is to not abdicate your health care to someone else and to what even society is saying that, you know, it should look like. And so you have to be an advocate for yourself. We have to be an advocate for our communities when we enter into a healthcare system. Otherwise, you will get lost and your voice gets lost. And so just to, if for nothing else, just always remain an advocate for your own health. You know it better than anybody else. And just to make sure that as individuals and communities that you advocate for that.
Let's thank this panel.